Very good afternoon to everyone. Now with Zoom, we are used to saying, can you see me, can you hear me? And being so sensationally tall, if I dare to stand behind the podium, you won't see me. Right, teachers, so I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the council, to Mrs. Perrin Wadley for recommending, to Father Joseph, to Mr. Emmanuel, Mr. Jerry Araton, and everyone in the council. I'm delighted to be here and to say the little that I have to share with the ICSE school teachers. Do we have time for questions at the end? Or can people intervene in between and ask questions? How do you like it? We keep questions for the end? All right, that's fine. And without much ado, I'll begin. Will there be any kind of indication if I have the last 5 to 7 minutes left? Yeah? Thank you. So, with that, let's begin. Academic challenges. These are numerous challenges that all of us face, but frankly speaking, principals, don't we love them? I can breathe, I can live the rest of my life enjoying the fact that I've been born an educator in this incarnation. So I'm sure that in spite of all the challenges, I think the challenges keep us alive. And that is what interests me. When I'm doing a presentation, there is at least one person or two people who say something which sets the clock ticking, and I rethink some of the things I had assumed were fine. So during the question session, please feel absolutely free to make your suggestions, to contradict me. It won't kill me. I'm a learner, in the true sense of the term. So with that, let's begin. The theme of today's seminar is revitalizing education. Let's look at this question first. Why is it that though we understand what the challenges are, and we have discussed them ad nauseum at seminars, workshops, everything, we can't still bring about meaningful social change? Teachers, I'd love for you to respond, at least 1 or 2 people to respond. Meaningful social change. We've made huge changes. Thank God we are not teaching the way I was taught. But I was taught also in some very, very interesting ways which have made me the kind of person I am. So there is nothing negative about the past and everything positive about the present, or what seems to be the more trendy styles of teaching. What do you think is a problem? Why have we not made meaningful social change? Anyone? Lack of interest in what? Could you just take that a step further, madam? Right, all right, very, very likely. One more response? Lack of dedication, yes? That's true, that's very, very true. Sorry? Excellent. As Gandhiji said, of course, and it's almost become a cliche, we need to be the change to see the change. But how? So many things are happening around us, it's confusing. How do we really be the change? My take on this is very, very simple. We are basically waiting for someone else to bring in the change. We put the blame on policymakers, politicians, school boards, management, principals. All that will be there. They may or may not change, but we as individuals need to change. As directors, as principals, you will tell me that you are facing a host of challenges, many more than the ones I've listed here. I don't need to read through this, you can go through this very quickly. But I think if there are any additions to it, please let me know. Sorry. Initially getting the kind of teachers who are interested in research. I think this is very, very important. If you are a teacher, you are not a textbook interpreter. You are much more than that. The textbook is the first step, and that should excite you and lead you into research. So we want teachers to be research-oriented, and very importantly, we want teachers to be able to retain their enthusiasm. Few years, they come in very enthusiastically, and few years down the line, they're all burnt out. And why? Because the demands of this profession are immense. So we need to work on that. And of course, ensuring that our students perform well at board exams, the behavior of students with the teachers and peers, attendance and dropout rates. The dropout rates post-COVID have been absolutely phenomenal. And how do we make it truly inclusive? How do we ensure academic excellence? And we need money for that infrastructure and academic excellence. And what many regard as an interference of parents. Today we have these Google parents, and they tend to believe that everything Google says is God's truth. So how do we grapple with this? How do we change this? I'm a storyteller, and my response is in the form of the story of the 100th monkey. People here know this story. Some of you know this story here. The 100th monkey effect. Well, this is a story which is rooted in fact. Anthropologists on different islands in Japan were observing monkey behavior. And in order to befriend the monkeys, they gave them sweet potatoes. One group of monkeys they observed had a natural leader, there always is, and they called that little monkey Emo. Emo took her sweet potato one day, washed it in water, and popped it in her mouth. And it tasted nicer without the mud and grime. So all the other little ones started doing the same. And finally, the adults caught on. Now, a stage aside would be adults catch on late. But never mind. So the monkeys all started washing the sweet potatoes. Now you'll say, no big deal, simple imitative behavior. But what happened was on other islands in Japan, all monkeys started washing their sweet potatoes. Scientist Rupert Sheldrake explains this with his morphic field theory. Very simply put, we need 1% to jumpstart change. 1%. 1 person in 100. And we need somewhere between 5 and 35% people to repeat that. So what happened is, Emo initiated the change, the other monkeys repeated that gesture till it became a part of the collective consciousness. Interesting. It has to happen. So every single principal sitting here, every single teacher sitting here is important to reach that tipping point when change must happen. So the change, again, I'm reinforcing, must begin with us. Metaphorically, we may be the first monkey, the 24th, the 38th, the 79th, but when the 100th monkey repeats that, change will happen. And with forums like this, I have immense faith that change will happen, and very soon. Are you with me, your principals? Yes? Yes? Good. So, would you like to be introduced very, very quickly and in brief to a thinking process which I innovated in 2014, called Technocourses, and which won me accolades. This book was selected among the 80 best in the US on education, and so on and so forth. If you see value in it, then do let me know. So would you like to be introduced to a simple process which makes learners future ready by changing consciousness? This is very important. The first point is very important. I'll elaborate on it in a moment. Makes the best practices in education available, is rooted in educational research, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, management studies, nurtures the 21st century skills. Don't ask me why they are called 21st century skills. I think they were always necessary, but never mind. And rests on UNESCO's 4 pillars of learning. Currently, the project that I'm doing with this is mainly encouraged by UNESCO and the UN. It also succeeds in urban as well as rural India. Again, I'll talk about this later. And it takes very little time. It only takes a week of orientation. 3 days for professional development, 3 days for personal development. And of course, after that, there is a bit of hand-holding. And what we are also worried about these days, the NEP. So actualizes several of the recommendations of NEP. As I told you, this process came into existence in 2014, way before NEP was thought about. But now it seems that a lot that NEP recommends is already woven into the fabric of Technocourses. Very briefly, what is this process? This is a process that can be used by teachers from pre-primary to professional levels, and it has been used. It's been used world over, not only in India, but in other parts of the world as well. And it's a simple 5-step process. Step 1 is relate. Why am I learning this? I have been the head of the Department of English, University of Mumbai. So one of the questions that the kids ask is, why are we doing Shakespeare? He wrote 450 years ago in Di Dao Do Dao Dum. And you say, well, let's see, let's explore. So I had an invitation from, not an invitation, it was an emergency. I had an IB school principal phone me and say, ma'am, I have been your student. I know how passionate you are about Shakespeare. Can you make my students interested in Shakespeare? We've just 2 months left before the exam. And I thought, all right, so which play is it? How long will I have with them? And she said, 14 minutes. And of course my face fell. What can I do in 14 minutes to get them all enthused? And 11th and 12th standard kids who look at you like this and say, okay, we'll bear up with you. So I went into class and I entitled my PowerPoint, boy, that cool dude Shakespeare still rocks. Is she off her head? Cool dude? I said, yes, he was a cool dude. How many girls sitting here would like to hear Aditya Khandala? Or would you like to hear 2 of the fairest towns in all the heavens having some business to entreat-terize? And I went on with the Romeo and Juliet speech, and the girls were all soft. I knew I had the girls. Then I went on to the rest, and I said, how many of you here believe that authoritarian government is the only answer to our challenges? And they said, no, exactly what the cool dude said. Have not to do eyes, have not to do senses, affections, passions, etc. from merchant of Venice. Then we played a game. And I said, give me an emotion, I'll give you a Shakespeare quote. And we had so much fun. I went away, and the school principal tells me, ma'am, what have you done? I said, what have I done? She said, you've created a problem for me. We only have 2 months left. And the kids kids are now saying, we don't want to do one play of Shakespeare, we want to do at least 3. I said, if I got them overcharged, that's not my problem, now you tackle that bit of it. The only thing was relevance. I made them see that this guy who wrote in Thee, Thou, 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 Thou is talking sense. And it actually relates to our lives in the 21st century. First step, relate. Second step, stimulate. We know about so many teaching methods and methodologies, and they remain rather fragmented in our lives. When I ask the teachers, do you know multiple intelligence? Yes, of course you do, pray. How many of you use it? We can't teach it 9 times. Oh my God, Harvard Gardner would probably commit suicide hearing that. He didn't want the same chapter to be taught 9 times. But bringing in the 9 different intelligences in your one single lesson plan. So we have this theoretical knowledge. Similarly with the VTRs, the visible thinking routines. How many here know about visible routines? Fewer people know. Yes, thank you. Thank you. 2 people, 3 people, whatever. But that's it. And then how many use it? Why? These are amazing, amazing ways of teaching. And yet we are not aware of them because we're so tied up with our traditional ways of teaching, which ensure the students' marks. Now this is a catch-22 situation. If that many students don't get 95%, the parents will kill us. But what are we in the final analysis wanting to do? We have to decide that. When you stimulate students with different learning styles, with different processing styles, through a lot of questions. I'll come to that again later. Collaborate. Getting students to work in groups and encouraging research. One of the things that the first school I taught in, J.B. Method School in Mumbai, taught me that even little ones could do research. They were told to do simple things, find out 2 more sentences. We're doing a horse today, and we're not going to tell you about the horse. And these little ones would trot to the library. The librarian would give them the information sheet, be ready with it. Now I realize that research can be encouraged from day 1. We don't need to wait to have the critical thinking skills developed before we do this. So collaborate can be very, very exciting. I've done a lot of programs nationally and internationally using this. Act. Knowledge must transfer to life. Otherwise it's meaningless, otherwise it's bookish. So if the first step is done carefully, relate, then act or action becomes easy. I was doing a poem by Tennyson on the flower with 4th standard kids. I was doing a demo. And I said, I read with that the haiku of Basho. And I asked the children, what is the difference between them? And the kids said, I didn't have to say that Tennyson killed the flower. Basho just let the nazunas bloom on the hedge. This is what our children are capable of. And then during the action stage, one of them wrote a letter to poor dead man Tennyson and said, do you realize that you killed it? Somebody else said, I'm going to tell my building secretary to prevent or to make a rule that nobody's going to pull out flowers. That's action. Knowledge to life. And finally, the most important stage, which even Ivy stops at the act stage, is unify. This is rooted in a very, very powerful concept that quantum physics has today valorized. That though at the superficial level, every single one of us is different, at the deeper level, we are energetically intertwined. Once you have this sense of oneness, and you promote that through your teaching, everything becomes easy. Your SEL, social, emotional, ethical intelligence comes automatically. A very, very important stage in technopoiesis. I have always been in awe of Jiddu Krishnamurti and deeply revered the thinker. Krishnamurti rightly said, education should usher in a revolution in consciousness, for it is the only revolution that can bring about lasting peace. And how correct he was. But this word consciousness is a rather nebulous term. We don't really know what it means, and we often associate it with Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness. But the consciousness which is ethical, forward-looking, intellectual is what I think Krishnamurti was talking about. Way back before Krishnamurti, Tagore mentioned that the highest education is that which does not merely give information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence. Anyone here who's familiar with Tagore's short story, The Parrot's Training? Anyone here? One person? Yeah? Okay, 2, 3. It's a brilliant story. Please go back and read it. Because in this story, the king hears a parrot singing outside, and the king says, oh, he's so happy only because he's illiterate. So he calls his nephews, and he tells his nephews the parrot has to be taught the scriptures. And I'll cut a long story short, it's brilliantly written. A beautiful gold cage is made, and learned pundits are called in, and the textbooks reach the sky, and in the final analysis, the bird dies. And when the king pokes its body, only leaves of pages from books come out. Of course, you know that Tagore was very, very critical of the education system of that day and age, and therefore his experiment with Shantiniketan and Vishwabharati. So this concept of technopoiesis is rooted in the idea of sourceful intelligence. What is sourceful intelligence? It is the dual capacity that we human beings have of understanding our uniqueness and our oneness. Not or. Uniqueness and oneness. Thank God we are different. Some of us teach math, some of us teach English, even at the very basic level. We're all different. Your reading, my worldview, everything is different from yours. The upper layers of our mind in Jungian psychology make us aware that we are different. But the deeper layers of our mind make us aware that all said and done, we are essentially one. And this is the core concept that technopoiesis is rooted in. The aim of education, according to me, is to transition the learner's consciousness from a self versus other consciousness. I happen to be standing here in front of you. This doesn't make me superior to you. You know a lot of things that I have no clue of. So instead of being locked in competition, can we move to collaboration, self and other, to a point when there is no other and all is self? The whole concept of a common chitta in Satchitta Ananda. And this is what every religion, everywhere, all the ancients have believed. And now, of course, it's got the stamp of quantum physics. We've known it. But this is the change in consciousness that I am trying for through my work. If I were to sum it up, a complete movement from polarity consciousness to unity consciousness. This brings me to the next part of my presentation. How many minutes do I have? 25 with questions. Good. Not only 5. Thank you. Okay. So diverse learning strategies that enrich the learning process So when I use technical courses, I bring in art-based learning, nature-based learning, thinking-based learning, play-based and experiential learning, social, emotional, and ethical learning, and a more recent term now by UNESCO, global citizenship education. So, in a single learning plan, teachers can bring in all this. And very often teachers say that we go for so many seminars and workshops, but it all remains fragmented, and we don't know how to integrate them. If we keep technical courses at the center as a core concept, all these very naturally get woven in. And I'm just finishing the last chapter of my book, which talks about all this. So, art-based learning. There are three ways in which art-based learning can be delivered. It can be using the arts, teaching with the arts, embellishing your teaching with the arts. So using painting, sculpture, drama, whatever, to enrich your teaching. That is teaching with the arts. Teaching about and in the arts is giving students more knowledge about that particular art form, the kind of material, the way in which you can experiment with it. And the third, teaching through the arts. This is very, very important. With technical courses, we mainly work through the arts. How can we actually teach a concept in physics, mathematics, geography, whatever, using art and encouraging children to express themselves through that art form? One of the most important things we need to understand, that we know this for a fact, that marks are not an indicator of understanding. And when did this come to me? As a head of the department, I was extremely well loved by my students. I wasn't doing all this at that time, it came much later in the 1990s. And I was a very, very powerful teacher. Students loved me. And 5 years later, 3 years later, 2 years later, when they came for PhD admissions, everything that we had taught was wiped out. And this made me sit and think, where did I go wrong? If they had understood, then it wouldn't have been wiped out. It wouldn't be short-term memory. So obviously, in spite of my passion for thinking, for teaching, something went wrong. And that led me to a complete exploration. How can I change my teaching to engage the learner enough in order to be able to understand? And that has been my quest since then. So we know that there are site-centered arts, and we can be using traditional and folk art, pictures, music, paintings, photographs, sculptures, videos, films, and so on and so forth. Speech and sound-centered arts like storytelling, literature, poetry, plays, essays, novels, biographies, singing, music, debating. These are only some of them. Body-centered arts, dance, action song, drama, mime, and puppetry. Nature-based learning. Now this is something which has become absolutely crucial. Once again, Tagore spoke of it way back. And Tagore talked about taking children out into the open, sitting under the trees and teaching them. How wonderful. We don't teach that way. We can't, in most cases, anymore. But we can still bring in nature into the classroom. And wherever possible, we can take them out and do that kind of teaching in nature. So when we talk about NBL, or nature-based training, it's an educational approach that utilizes the natural environment as content and as context So you bring in nature, as I've said in the next part. It includes learning experiences when in nature as well as learning with nature. I think all of us as educationists have heard about Sir Ken Robinson. Yes? Sir Ken Robinson. He launched a Twitter campaign called Dirt is Good. Dirt is good. Because studies have proved that children, and we know this again, children are spending very little time outdoors because of several reasons. Parents are very apprehensive of the crime rate, which is a reality, and of other safety issues. And of course, the burden of homework is another reason why many kids don't play, and of course the major reason is they find their technological devices far more attractive than going out and playing. A few years ago, when we said I'm hanging out with my friends, we talked about going for a cup of coffee to coffee day. Today, hanging out with your friends, and of course much more, as the earlier speaker acquainted us with, is happening. And students find this kind of technological engagement far more interesting than going outdoors, but it's a huge problem. And there are many, many health hazards, etc. associated with it. So we need to bring in nature and love for nature. My work is very, very strongly supported by the environmentalist Bittu Saigal. I think most of you know him. An environmentalist par excellence, absolutely passionate, Kids for Tiger, etc., etc. And one of the things that Bittu said one day to me was that, Coomi, we don't have to foist ecological grief on our little children. We don't have to tell them, look at the mess that my ancestors and I have made. Now, and right now, you clean it up. It's daunting. It's frightening. You made the mess and you're telling me to clean it up. It's very daunting. So I said, Bittu, what is the solution? And he said, just make kids love nature. You don't damage things you love. So just make kids love nature, and then they will be more mindful about nature. And of course, as they grow up, you can acquaint them with all the problems. So, some of the very, very obvious benefits of nature-based learning are physical wellness, and we know that childhood obesity and a host of other problems are a reality among children today. Positive effects on brain functions, I've listed all this in my book. Academic development, personal development, enhanced emotional intelligence, social intelligence, stewardship mindset and behaviors, and very importantly, it revitalizes teachers. We just spoke about teacher burnout. And here, NBL is known to revitalize teachers as well. Which brings me to the third, thinking-based learning. We are all, are you awake? This is a post-lunch session. Are you awake? Right, I'll carry on. So there are three forms of thinking. We have convergent thinking, which is logical thinking. When computer probes are put on your head and you're doing your mathematics or any kind of structured work, the computer graphs show geometric patterns. When you're doing this kind of thinking, let me give you an example. Suppose I say, Matt sat a cat. You will say rubbish. A cat sat on a mat. Because that structure is hardwired into our brain. Similarly, 2 plus 2 only makes 4. It can't make anything else. And as a parent, I learned it the hard way. When my son one day got a 0 in math, and I asked him what happened. I mean, I was never a hyper mother. I said, this is interesting. How did you get a 0? And he said, I got bored of counting up and down. I did it side to side. So the reason was so lovely and so simple. But I said, mathematics won't allow you that. There you have to do it up and down every single day. So convergent thinking is logical thinking. We need it. We definitely need it. My presentation has been planned and planned over days with the help of logical and convergent thinking. But we also need divergent thinking. Divergent thinking involves bringing in a host or multiplicity of new ideas. And you know, the management people love doing it. They have their little sticky notes, and every new idea is put on a sticky note. There is a lot of sense to that. A lot of sense. They, of course, making thinking visible at the same time. So, divergent thinking is creating a multiplicity of ideas. This is an issue. Every single one, write on a piece of paper, put it up, let's look at it, and then we'll see which of these are workable. Lateral thinking, we know, and lateral thinking we associate with Edward de Bono, brings together convergent and divergent thinking. Because it is not just creativity for the sake of creativity. The true meaning of creativity is producing something that has value, not random. Because you could be creating something which could be harmful to others. Even that is creative. Right? So creativity is defined in that way. Now, how do we bring this into our classrooms? We bring it in with questioning, active listening, and documenting. Many of us think that we are very good at asking questions, but most of the time we have one single answer in our mind. That is not genuine questioning. The art of questioning has been given to the world by Socrates. Every time Socrates was asked a question, he asked a counter question to make that person think deeper. So the art of questioning, then the art of active listening. Again, we know we call it deep listening sometimes. But here are students saying something, but we're already thinking about something else, and they feel we're not important enough. Our view is not important enough. And then they lose interest and so on and so forth. And the third is documenting. It's extremely important that thinking should be documented. Because it gets lost otherwise. That is what the PTRs help us to do. And I'll make that point here. Visible thinking routines, there are 21 of them, and in this short presentation, of course, there's no time to discuss any of them. But it's very useful for this. The other thing, and I have used this intensely, is design thinking. Now, these just may seem fashionable words, but design thinking makes you realize that what you believe is the solution today may not be the solution even 1 week from now. There is this process, again I can't go through this is a diagram I've created, but the process is very simple. It's the blue one, the blue branch. The first is empathy. When you work with design thinking, you actually try to understand what the user's problem is. I'm saying this in the context of both learners as well as parents. I've tried it out in both cases. So, understanding in great detail, then defining the problem, that's the second stage, then ideating and creating a prototype, and then testing. And if it does not succeed, no problem, we go back to the second stage. The first stage, we've already collected the data. So we don't have to go back to the first stage, but we proceed from there. So design thinking is something which can be easily taught to students, and that would bring into play flexibility, respect for the views of others, and so on and so forth. Play-based and experiential learning, PD and EL. There are many kinds of play. There are some educationists who strongly advocate unstructured or free play, and they all three have their benefits. Others talk about guided play. And I think that as teachers and principals, this is the kind we use most often. We teach mathematics, or we teach about atoms through an atom dance, for instance. That brings in the play element, including, of course, art-based teaching. And the third is mutually directed play. Suppose a child, you've decided to play the What's a Good Word game. Now, What's a Good Word game has been invented by someone and it's been played very often. But suppose you tell your students that this time we will play a vocabulary game which you guys will invent. That is mutually directed play. Then, of course, the absolute importance of outdoor play, it cannot be emphasized more. And also through gamification. Now, there is a basic difference between gaming and gamification. When you are using games for teaching, again, you are just enhancing your teaching with that. But when you work with gamification, you first create your learning outcomes, keep your eye firmly focused on the learning outcomes, get your tech ed, your technology advisor, to create a game which will bring in the content with the help of the students. So ideally speaking, the EdTech person will first create a board game with the students. And then that will become a digital game. By the end of it, the learning outcomes have to be accomplished. And that is our desire. We want to see that the learning outcomes are actually, what we intend they should learn is actually learned. So these are some of the methods. Of course, again, here, when it comes to experiential learning, Paul has given us this entire cycle of learning cycle, as he calls it, and we can plug in anywhere. Anywhere. There is no first stage, second stage, but all four stages have to be gone through. And there are different forms in which it appears. We can do it through project-based, which is different from doing project. Teachers, when we tell our students to do project these days, they outsource the projects, which is very unfortunate. So the whole aim of projects, not project-based learning, is defeated. I've had several IB parents coming to me and saying, my daughter, my son has to do this particular thing on literature or on education. Would you do it for them as a project? Because they have no time for projects. There is a basic difference between project-based learning, where it is extended over a long period of time. For instance, a school recently received a letter from 7th standard kids, and the kids said they wanted a bicycle track, and they thought this was a great learning experience. So they brought in the science teachers, maths teachers, literature teachers, all of them, and they said, can we make this into a project for 6 months? Over and above the things they were doing, but then that content was not touched. So in the first stage, old bicycles were brought, they were dismantled, remade, and donated. In the second stage, they learned the history of bicycles, and they got to know much more about it from the engineering and science point of view. And this went on very carefully structured program with all the different subject teachers coming together. 6 months later, their project culminated, and they had their bicycle track. Now the school principal would have said, okay, there's a lot of space, I'll give you a bicycle track, and forgotten about it. But the principal saw this as a unique opportunity to do project-based learning, which is not project. Am I clear? Am I making sense? Yeah? Okay. Very, very importantly, social, emotional, ethical learning through mindfulness. Now again, the NEP wants us to do this, but how can teachers who have not learned it teach it. It's like saying, I think I should teach you swimming. I have never set my toe into water, but I'll read 17 books and I'll teach you. It's as absurd as that. How can teachers need intensive training in self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, relationship skills, and an understanding of quantum oneness? So the second part of my training program is devoted completely to this. Because very often in schools, and we are all human, come on, I'm not being judgmental, but there is so much of tutu meme, so much of kattis and battis among teachers. And the students feel that if there are kattis and battis among teachers, there should be kattis and battis among us. As simple as that, and your SEL is out of the door. No, SEL is brilliant, it's extremely important, it's a huge life skill. And it goes way beyond your certificates and diplomas and degrees. So as I said, relationships excellence are a question of compare. Finally, what we now call, I'm sorry there's a mistake there, it's not GEED, it's GCED, Global Citizenship Education. This is a term given to us by UNESCO. We all talk about the 17 Sustainable Goals, but how do we get children to become mindful about that and be backed into our regular teaching? How do we teach them that what Tagore in Gitanjali called narrow domestic walls is the main cause of all our unhappiness and which breeds absolutely obnoxious things like racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, anything which is divisive, anything which is divisive. So, I don't like this word tolerance either. We should learn and teach our children to tolerate. Tolerate is, okay, I'll let go with you. No, we should be celebrating diversity. Thank God we are different. God did not say, I think human beings need some fruits. I'll make one apple and finish off with it. We have so much of variety in nature. And thank God we are all unique and yet one, as we say with Technopoesis. So Technopoesis has proved to be successful in urban as well as rural areas. The most challenging thing came to us during the pandemic. We had parents from rural areas who were very worried that their children were not learning. So, community workers, not teachers, community workers who were interested, we did an online training with them. They went from house to house. It was called the Education at Your Doorstep program, where they just gathered a few kids and they started teaching the way we advised them. The thing is that now that the schools have reopened, the kids don't want to go to the Zilla Parishad schools. They want to remain with the community workers and study that way. So Technopoesis has proved to be successful in urban and rural areas in numerous countries all around the world and at different levels, from pre-primary to higher education. All levels, yes, all levels of education. If I were to sum up, I would say what is the change that is required to make our learning systems into dynamic new ecosystems. The word system has an inbuilt rigidity in it. Ecosystems is much more organic. So we talk about the 3 R's in traditional as reading, writing, arithmetic, but now the 3 R's have been reinterpreted by different people in different ways, like respect, responsibility, relationships, etc., etc. Again, you could read this slide, you could take a photograph. How many minutes? Okay, I want time for questions. All right. So you can read through the slide or you can just take a photograph. The next one is also the same. It continues this conversation. The next slide. And the next. So what is the difference between traditional learning systems and ecosystems? I think one of the very, very important things that we need to notice is that in the traditional system, technology has been used for teaching. In learning ecosystems, it's used for learning. That's a very, very major difference, and of course the rest are very obvious. And here we forge partnerships with parents. We bring them into the fold, we bring them into... If my ideas have interested you, you could definitely get in touch with me, and together we could do something. Every year, I host an online Global Tipping Point Summit, which is strongly supported by Ms. Perrin Buckley and several other principals. We had 7,232 participants, and people are getting really interested. Together, we can make a difference. I wanted to end with my favorite quote from my favorite poet, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The others sit around and pluck berries. We can't afford to sit around and pluck berries. We can bring heaven on earth. Thank you for your attention. Five. I just got out. Can I give it to you later? I'll give it to you later. Thank you. Any questions, any doubts, any queries? You're free to contest things that I've said. Anything. If you were awake, there will be questions. Very clear. Okay, thank you. But do you agree with it? You know, because as I said, so many new things are happening. We need to draw them together into a single quilt. And this is the attempt that has been made. You have a question? Lovely. You were awake.
Ma'am, first thing is that after having listened to you, we have actually got the demonstration what articulate speaking is, what eloquent speaking is, and what profound thought sharing is. Thank you so much for this wonderful session.
I think we need to spell out what ET is. It makes me feel like extraterrestrial.
No, ma'am. The sort of presentation that you have given, this is really extraterrestrial because it is really very rare. Your very soothing voice was music to the ears, and perhaps that is why, time and again you had to give us a wake-up call. But one point,
yes,
where I have a little bit of perhaps less understanding, and I want more understanding from your side.
Absolutely.
This is regarding marks. Well, every time, whenever results are declared, those schools are always given preference, or those schools are always appreciated where students have done that. And we always say that a school is good because marks are good. And average score is really something that matters a lot. And I personally also feel, ma'am, it's not that easy to get marks. The students who get marks, they have those winning qualities, those winning virtues in them, which make them winners, or which make them, score good marks. So if they have good time management, if they have self-discipline, if they have proper understanding of the concepts and knowledge, and if they're listening in that classroom, if they are alert in that classroom, and if they are making good use of all these points which have been shared here, then only marks are possible. So why should we sideline the importance of marks?
Very important question. That's a very important question. I rushed through it towards the end. I should have specified it. Firstly, our entire education system, and it's not just ours, it's everywhere. If we talk about Harvard Gardner's multiple intelligences as 9, or at least 8, if we exclude existential, How many of them are we testing? 2. So what happens to children with different configurations of intelligence? Right? We are not testing those. We are calling that important. We are including that in our pedagogy, but we are not testing it. The important question, and I've again said this in my book is called Educating to Empower. And what I say in that book is that we don't need to ask, is Arjun intelligent? We need to ask, in what way is Arjun intelligent? Now, if we ask this question, are we being fair to Arjun by telling him, as a lot of things are attributed to Einstein these days, I don't know if he actually said it, that you ask a fish to climb a tree. It's literally that. So it's not that Arjun is unintelligent, because neuroscience has told us that unless you are physiologically brain damaged, there are 3 intelligences which are dominant in each and every one of us. And others can be sharpened, honed. Now, we disregard that. We know it in theory, but in practice we are only assessing 2. So what happens to Arjun? Arjun becomes a poor learner. Then we have new labels. Dyslexic, dysgraphic, this, that. I don't believe this. I believe the fault lies with us. We are not testing them the way they want to learn. Their learning styles, their processing styles, their expression styles are different. I had a student with me, J.B. Pettit, when I first began my career, as I said. And that girl was supposed to be a terror. Firstly, I'm 5 feet 1 inch, with heels maybe a little more. But she was towering above me, and I was a class teacher in Standard 9. And she was aggressive, she was rude, she was vulgar, she was wicked, she was just everything. And she was sent to a psychiatrist. And she had great fun with the psychiatrist. She used to twirl that poor psychiatrist around her little finger. And I kept on, I was very, very young, and I kept on thinking there must be something good about her. And I found out that she was exceptionally good at art. I went to teacher after teacher of different subjects, and there was Miss Tracy telling me that she's exceptional. I went to her and I said, I can visualize something very beautiful when I'm reading a poem, but I don't have that artistry. My hand doesn't obey my vision. Can you do it for me? And that brought me in close contact with her. And I spent a lot of time with her, not in the staff room with her, and she completely outgrew it. And for the first time she felt good about herself. And she didn't do any of the silly things that she was doing. Of course, there was another part to the story also. But it was amazing. The transformation was amazing. Because I didn't know anything about the learning styles in 1982. But I just intuitively tapped in to what she was good at. So if we do that with students, they are bound to be good at something. And if we test them in that way. Sir Ken Robinson also very importantly says that there is a difference between testing and assessment. And when we are focusing on marks and summative assessments only, we are not being fair. As you rightly said, obviously the things, these children have got certain things right. Time management, study skills, they've got them right. I'm not disputing that. But what I'm saying is that it's not the whole story. I mean, I personally am much more for formative assessment, which looks at the process rather than the product. And we need to help parents also think like that, and importantly the higher education system, because the parents may also agree, but if for college admission, 1% here or there is going to make a difference. So the whole system has to change. But who will begin the change? We. Right? Anything else? Anyone else?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, ma'am, and it's been a wonderful presentation by you, and really learned a lot. I was a student in the 90s when I was at Bombay University, English department myself.
Okay.
I didn't last more than 2 months at Bombay University, and I ran away and I was back.
All right. We'll discuss that over tea.
Ma'am, probably I haven't understood your concept of gamification very clearly. What you seem to convey was that we have a pre-decided outcome,
Yes.
and we decide on the game like that. But
You-
then the problem comes that right through we're talking about giving the children the chance to express themselves and free themselves and find their own outcomes. If we're pre-deciding the outcome, how does the game
Right, so this is a form of guided play. Gamification is a kind of guided play. Now, 3 or 4 different subject teachers sit together and we say we want these learning outcomes. We talk to the EdTech coordinator. We tell the EdTech coordinator, can you get the students to actually create a game which will make sure that the learning outcomes are focused upon. So the EdTech coordinator, who's also a teacher, but extremely good with education technology, is going to sit with the students and tell them, let's create a game. But when they move away from it, very gently, without their knowledge perhaps, very carefully, the EdTech coordinator brings them back to it. And then they have the joy of having created that game. And as they play that game, they learn the content. Am I clearer? Thank you.